Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to my Rise and Fall of the Ottoman Empire Part 2. And I'll get straight in from where we left off. Last but not least, the rise of nationalism among the people under Ottoman dominion was a key factor in the dissolution of the empire. As at the end of the 19th century, shortly before its final collapse, the territory of the Ottoman Empire dwindled due to growing calls for independence coming from different ethnic groups. If ruled for hundreds of years, the empire's inclusiveness, which marked it as a direct successor of the Byzantine Empire, was most certainly challenged by the aging leadership, the Ottoman Empire's inability to create a shared identity, a weak central state, and growing inner dissatisfaction with some of the main factors explaining its long demise. This is, in my humble historical opinion, bollocks. It was all to do with the propaganda issued by the English and the fuel of nationalism involving oil wars during the First World War, the discovery of oil, the vast amount of resources into the Middle Eastern territories, and the key factorable reasons of why the English, and I am very critical of my own country's desire for oil, fueled individual nationalism to destroy the Ottomans. The Ottomans were already going through their own reformations, their own reforms of their empire, as I've just said in my previous video. So there was no reason, historically speaking, for the French and the English to get involved. Arab nationalism could have been given autonomy and still kept the unity of the Islamic world. Such a failure also explains the need for a creation of a new form of identity, which was ultimately provided by Mustafa Kemal, the founding father of modern Turkey. Overall, the history of the dissolution can be defined as a race between the empire's growing illness, on one side, the Ottomans' inability to appease and federate the various people within its territories. This is garbage. They made several legal reasons, mentalities to be able to do so. The problem was it was interrupted by greed and English spies, and constantly attempts to find a cure in the form of abroad reforms. Yes, this is true. These questions are often presented together, but they tend to shift the focus outwards onto the various people and their aspirations, along with Europe's growing influence over the fate of the Ottoman Empire. No, this isn't pushed outwards. This is reality. This is historical reality. To consider both the illness and the cure is necessary to separate them before we move on to the direct cause of the empire's dissolution during World War I and its heritage. I'm already disliking this book. The rise and fall of the Ottoman Empire, the history of the Turkish Empire, created its destruction over 600 years later. So that was just the introduction that we've got through. I've now come to Anatolia and the Byzantine Empire. Previous to the existence of the Ottoman Empire, there were two dominant powers in the area, both of which the Ottomans had to conquer in order to grow into the empire it would become. The Byzantine Empire existed for over 1,000 years, with a history spanning from the division of the Roman Empire in 395 until the conquest of Constantinople in 1453. It was formed from the previous Eastern Roman Empire, and during its long existence, the Byzantines inhabited were very proud to call themselves Romans. However, many things changed during the long lifespan of the Byzantine Empire, starting with the Hellenization in the 6th century, the use of Latin language diminishing, and the Greek took its place. Once the typical Roman culture gave way to a more Hellenicized, the Hellenization of Byzantium was determinal to the relationship with the Holy Roman Empire and the Christian world. From the point would be the split in two. I've spoken about this before on my TikToks. The Holy Roman Empire and the Christian world from this point on would be split in two. The strength of the Orthodox Church caused many civil wars and conflicts to arise during the centuries, which shattered and reshaped the territory time after time. By the end of the Byzantine Empire's existence, the old age had weakened both the state and church, making it an easy target for the invasions. No, the inbreeding, incapacities, and we have a very term Byzantine politics led to this. The age of the empire had very little to do with it. Yes, Rome was a sickly nation, relatively speaking, and needed to be critically put down, but that didn't by itself make it incapable of actually surviving if it could reform. Such an invading group was, among others, the Turk-speaking Seljuks, led through a series of battles, the Kultumislurian Suleiman, who supposed different usurpers against Byzantine Empire. The expansion of the Seljuks was successful, and when Suleiman died, he had put all of Bithynia under his control, as well as several important harbour towns along the shores of the Asian side of the Bosporus. With the accomplishment, he had managed to separate the Byzantine living in Anatolia from their emperor in Constantinople. This immediately weakened the unity of the Byzantine Empire. When another invading Muslim army took control of what today is Syria, Israel, and North Africa, the dismembered Byzantine Empire lost significant portions of land, but instead grew into a smaller and stronger unity. It took a lot of power struggles and battles on many fronts for the empire to recapture some of the land, though control over Anatolia was shared with the Seljuk sultanates of Rum. Gradually, the Byzantine Empire lost all influence in Anatolia, and by the end of the 11th century, the Hellenic culture and Greek language were replaced by Islam and Turkish. So the Anatolian battles went on for centuries. There was this running up backwards and forwards with the Seljuks. The Sultanate of Rum was an independent state in the Seljuk Empire and united many different tribes under one rule. Whilst the Seljuk Empire was heavily influenced by Persian culture and language, the Sultanate of Rum kept its Turkish traditions and roots, and also postponed adopting the new religion spreading in the area, Islam. Though the Seljuk Empire didn't last for as many years as their neighbouring Byzantines, it was critical for the unification of the area, thus paving way for the future overtake by the Ottomans and making the transition of power slightly smoother. Because the Seljuks and the Ottomans are, I think, tribally different people. Both the empire were still in existence when the Ottoman seeds were planted in what today is Western Turkey. As the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum grew in power and absorbed more and more of the neighbouring states, with ports on both sides of the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, the Byzantine Empire was frequently invaded both from the north and south. It stood on its high by the end of the 10th century with large land masses in what today is Bulgaria, the Baltic south of Italy, parts of Romania and most of Turkey. People in the subjugated states were dissatisfied with the ruthlessness of the Orthodox Church and the violence by which it had conquered them. The acrimony of the defeated Bulgars and Armenians made their loyalty vain, and they didn't put up much resistance when the Ottomans finally arrived. The Seljuks controlled some of the trade passes by one of the road stretches, all the way from the port of Junia, the Holy Roman Empire, via the Mediterranean Sea into Anatolia, and further on along the Silk Road. During the certain Central Asia to China, not just wares but also sciences, medicine, philosophy and culture were exchanged along the route, making the area prosperous and progressive. The multicultural exchange had positively impacted on minor groups in the region during the Seljuks takeover and later on in the Ottoman Empire. Christians and Jews were most of the time not proselytizing to the Islamic faith. In fact, a big part of the European Jewish population fled from the violent spread of Christianity to the Muslim territories in Anatolia, but Christians and Jews were allowed to practice their religion within Muslim communities. Contrary to most people's belief that Muslims exterminate people by sword, conquest by sword was normal in this time period from any power, regardless of religion. Something, again, the Christian world forgets to mention. Both Christians and Jews were allowed to practice their religion within the Muslim community, others as secondary citizens. This is bollocks. In contrast, the Christian Holy Roman Empire fought ruthlessly against indigenous beliefs. Muslims and Jewish people in the east, the Sultanate of Rum kept its firm grip on Anatolia and withstood three attacking crusades sent by the Holy Roman Empire between 1096 and 1192. It wasn't until the Mongols first struck the Sultanate at Uzerim in 1242 that the Sultanate started to decline and soon fell apart. The Turks had to swear allegiance to the Mongols whilst the Sultan fled to the Byzantine Balkans. After his death a few years later, the Sultanate of Rum was divided into small emirates, so-called Bialeks, of which the Ottoman family ruled one. The clash between the Orthodox Byzantine Empire and the Catholic Roman Empire persisted, and instead of assisting their Christian brothers in fighting back the bellicose invaders, the Catholic Church contributed to Byzantium's grievances. Pope Urban II urged his devotees to head to the Holy Land of Jerusalem, take it back from the heathen Muslims. Of course, involving more of the Crusades. Crusader states and Crusader nations in Europe spent more time fighting each other and fighting their Byzantine religious cousins than they did ever in any kind of effort to try and unifiably fight against Islam. If they did, in this time period, Islam would have been in deep trouble. And that's truly historical proof, in fact, because the technology, numbers, and firepower was in Christendom's hands at that time period. And I hope you've enjoyed those 10 minutes, and I hope to probably do a couple more of these later today. Alhamdulillah, we'll see.